Hello, everyone. Well, I'm really pleased for Paul. Paul is from London, by the way, because we need to specify the location of the winner, and I'm really pleased that he won this round. Well, what can I say? Since we spoke last, there have been some positive changes in our lives. Well, at least here in the UK, not in India, probably not in Brazil, but here definitely. Uh, and we are even able to do some travels with Christine. I started researching my next book on Britain's utopia. So we spent several days in our camper van going to Cotswolds and around Cotswolds, and it was beautiful, excellent weather. So we got some great material, including, we discovered a very little known community called White Way. It's Tolstoyan community, believe it or not, been living there in the quiet corner of Cotswolds for over 100 years, still pretty much in the same style as they used to live before. Very reclusive people. So yeah, I'm kind of back in my element, as you can see, because I'm going to tell you a bit later about a couple of other rather obscure communities that I had the pleasure and the chance to discover. Uh, but you keep hearing that, well, life is never going to be the same again after this pandemic. The world is never going to be the same, which probably means the travel is never going to be the same either. And I already see certain signs of that. Uh, for example, and it is from yesterday's national newspaper, from the travel section. Uh, so it reports that this weekend, Ukraine International Airlines will operate a joy flight over the Chernobyl reactor site. The carrier promises an onboard raffle with the top prize of a day trip to the disaster zone. Well, what can I say? Definitely a new kind of travel. It reminds me of that famous joke by Brendan Behan, about the competition over the radio, uh, well, about Northern Ireland, with the first prize being 1 week in Northern Ireland, and second prize 2 weeks in Northern Ireland. But anyway, you mentioned that winning the raffle, to go to the disaster zone. Uh, yeah, actually, I didn't start my presentation, so to speak, from this by accident. It's all closely connected to what I'm going to say now. There is a very strong connection between what I have just said, believe it or not, and the quote, the motto of our today's webinar from Robert Byron, yeah, which you should have seen on your screens. The supreme moments of travel, one of beauty and strangeness. Robert Byron was an amazing writer, amazing stylist, and I think in this sentence, everything about proper travel is expressed. So if you look at this, what Ukrainian airlines are doing now, well, there is definitely strangeness there, but there is no beauty, of course. There is not a lot of beauty in the Chernobyl site. I was one of the first journalists to visit it after the first Western journalist after the explosion, and I made a documentary about it for Channel 4. So the reactor was still kind of smoking, and the radiation was absolutely unbelievable around it. The protection was very, very basic. So I still probably regard it as one of the stupidest things I ever done. But, um, I was assured that because we only spent less than a day at the site, it shouldn't have affected me too badly. Uh, but an interesting fact, with our Channel 4 crew, we couldn't get insurance for that particular day of the trip from any insurer in the world. They really tried. So we were the uninsured and practically unprotected. But I needed to do it because of my family history, because of my father dying of after effects of irradiation and so on. So it was the trip that I had to do and tell the viewers about it. And the documentary went down pretty well. It was the pick of the week, in the UK. And I'm quite proud of having done that. Why Robert Byron? Uh, the fact is that when we came back and I got my payment for the movie, what I did, I went to the bookshop in Charing Cross and bought this book, which at that time cost me £95. This is 95. I'll just open it for you. Uh, it's the first edition. of Robert Byron's book, The Station, which he wrote and published when he was 23 years old, believe it or not. He died at 35, unfortunately. So this is one of the most beautiful books, travel books in existence. It was not reissued actually for many years. Now it has been reprinted. So it is the book about Mount Essex, uh, probably the most amazing, the most unusual place that I had a chance to visit, and not once, but 3 times. And actually, I had a chance to make some difference to it as well, which I'm going to tell you about. So Robert Byron was very interested. He was an Etonian, studied in Oxford, very educated man, very interested in Byzantine culture and the history of Byzantium, ancient Greece. So one of his first kind of trips after the university was to Mount Essex, which is like the Vatican for Orthodox Christianity. Well, I nearly call it an island because it is actually a peninsula geographically, but in fact, it is an island because it's only accessible from the sea. The land border is not well. It's basically closed. I've been there. You can't cross it, and it's patrolled by the special monastic police. Of that amazing mini state, Mount Essex, called Serdaris. Yeah, there's monastic police there, among other interesting things. Uh, so I was again one of the first British journalists, actually among the 4 of us. There was a group who was allowed or kind of invited to go there rather in 1993. They were extremely reclusive. The state, which is 1,000 years old, they still, I mean, they're a bit less reclusive now, but especially if you are not Orthodox, by religion, it's pretty hard to get there. And if you are a woman, it is impossible to get there at all, because Mount Essex was and remains the world's only all-male state. Just imagine that, sizable peninsula with about 30 large monasteries and hundreds of smaller kind of monastic communities, Kellyan's and so on, populated by several thousand monks with its own capital, with its own port of entry, Daphne. The state, which over 1,000 years not only hasn't seen a single woman, it hasn't heard, its streets have never heard, and its walls have never heard a baby crying. It's pretty impossible to imagine. There have been several attempts, of course, by the women, and I don't blame them, to get there under the guise of men, and one of those women who succeeded was actually a beauty queen from Greece, but it always ended badly because the poor monks would normally, some of them fall in love with those young monks, who are actually women, and run away with them, and in a couple of cases committed suicide. There have only been 3 or 4 attempts. Once, a group of women was stranded by mistake and so on. But when I was there for the first time in 1993, I could still remember the sign on the on the seashore near the port of Daphne. It said, "Women and tractors are not allowed." So well, and some monasteries said, "Women and video cameras are not allowed." Um, so this is not a monastic whim, whatever it is. This whole country is like one large monastery. So there's a good Russian proverb: you don't come to someone else's monastery with your own statute of conduct. So they have their own statute of conduct, which was started by a special edict of Constantinople over 1,000 years ago, which said that all the women in that patch of the world, would be represented by Holy Mary, and basically Holy Mary is the patron saint of Mount Essex, and all the monks with whom I spoke, they keep saying that it's kind of enough for them, well, there are all kinds of things happening there, of course, because we're all human. And at some point, I had a guide who was, well, a male guide from Greece who was probably definitely kind of working on the side as a monastic whore as well. So it was pretty obvious. But most of the monks, actually, they stick to the rules. There are a couple of skeeters in the mountains there. It's a stunningly beautiful place, who have special permission to have hens. Yeah, because female animals are not allowed to eat. Well, you have to be consistent. All cats are male, and those 2 skeeters specializing in icon painting, they're allowed to have hens because they need egg yolks for their paints, that they can't do without them. But they had to have special permission from the Holy Synod, which is a very democratic elected government of that place, which rotates every year, changes every year, and includes the abbots of 10 largest monasteries. This is actually, you can see in the picture, the monastery where I stayed twice. It's called Shimona Petra. It's one of the most dramatic monasteries, in terms of situation. And if you can imagine that, the guests asked, that we have to stay in Arkandariki, which is the guest quarters, obviously, I think on the second or third floor. But to get to the toilet, you had to walk above the precipice along really pretty flimsy uh, boards. It's all like covered with huge scaffolding, like medieval fortress that hasn't been quite finished. It looks like because of all the scaffolding everywhere. So you walk there to the toilet, especially in the dark. I can tell you it was not a very pleasant feeling because underneath there was the sea and several hundred meters of precipice. So as I wrote in my book Little is the Light, when I described this for the first time, it was an ideal place for committing suicide, even if you don't feel particularly suicidal. So that's a very strong memory of that. Plus, they had kind of lots of funny bands. Like, for example, in the washing quarters, monks are never allowed to bathe themselves. Never ever, apart from sometimes probably inside their cells. So in the washing quarters, there was a sign saying that uh, you are supposed to wash yourself basically without taking your clothes off, uh, and lots of other, rather strange kind of orders and signs. We really felt like pioneers. The place was full of amazing historic treasures, and there was something in the air there, something really holy. And you remember, before London had pretty cynical creatures, we all were. But by the end of our stay, several days only we were allowed to stay. We were all had felt a touch of something, probably something divine. Yes, it was unbelievable. And that divinity stemmed from the monks themselves rather than from the beautiful sky and amazing medieval monasteries. The treasures they keep there are just second to none. They have the first maps of the world. They have manuscripts by Ptolemaeus, and so on. And one day they actually made a mistake because under the pressure of different kind of feminist lobbies and so on. So they had an exhibition of their treasures in Saloniki in 1998. And when people from the outside world saw what they had brought to exhibit, they said, well, if they brought this out, we can imagine what they have there on the island, on the peninsula. And they were sued by one feminist organization in the European Court of Justice, which luckily threw out this case, but I think they will never going to do it again now because they're once bitten, twice shy, They kind of tried to show something of what they had, but, uh, shows how correct is the probe. You give him an inch and they take a meter, So, as I said, I can't understand that women don't like hearing about this place, and even the Queen was not allowed on it. 500 meters, they can only come as close as 500 meters, no closer. She had to stay on a boat while Prince Philip, who had obviously some roots in Greece, as you know, he visited it. So there are no exceptions. Uh, uh, I was able to help that place, Uh, uh, I just finished this story because there's so much to tell. I could talk about Mount Essos alone, for a very, very long time. It is probably the most amazing place, the most amazing discovery that I made. I was kind of allowed to make almost, I would say. I befriended a monk, a Bulgarian monk who lived in a separate Kelian. Kelian is a separate monastic dwelling. It's like a farm, So there are still some monks who live in skitas and in little cells, like reclusive monks and so on. But he had a farm, basically, and he was responsible for the land. And he made the best grappa I ever tried. I remember we got so drunk on it, 150 liters a year he was making. And he was a former film director and he had an amazing life, spoke 9 languages. Unfortunately, he passed away several years ago. And this skitas was acknowledged by UNESCO as the oldest continuously inhabited dwelling in Europe, believe it or not. And it was falling apart. when we first visited, really falling apart. The local church in the basement, iconoclastic church, still with flowers, no human kind of images. It was crumbling apart, you know. So I wrote a piece for the European newspaper when I then worked about the monk and this church, and they after that received a rather generous grant from the Greek government. And when I came there for the second time, already he had some Albanian workers, you know, fixing it all, and the place looked, you know, much more, much kind of fresher, much younger than before, and he was in a good mood, you know. And he said to thank me, he could arrange for me to be the first person who would be allowed to film in Mount Essel. But I was, of course, you know, very excited, but nothing came out of it in the end because the BBC simply did not believe me when I said them that I got this permission. So, and it was a bit risky, you know, but still. So that kind of amazing story. But what was interesting is that everyone on the second and third visits, everyone knew who I was, you know. It was kind of, ever was a proper celebrity, it was there, you know, because the monks would come up to me and said, oh, you are that Russian journalist who helped to save Father Yannick Yaskelian. Said, yeah, so that was really very nice. And I'm very, very proud of it. Maybe my kind of main journalistic achievement, so to speak. Well, I'll come back to Mount Essel a bit later. It is, again, it is an example of a discovery. And it's some kind of been accompanying me through all my life because via it, I kind of was introduced to Robert Byron and his magnificent books and became Robert Byron's fan, you know, and uh, got this first edition of the Station and still follow. I still read Robert Byron's books, and I recommend him strongly to you as well because this beauty and strangeness are indeed uh, the main attractions of travel, and he put it very well. Now I want to briefly, just very briefly, uh, because our subject is well, all kinds of oddities. Our world is is an odd place, frankly. I think you all know it. Someone who stayed here for more than a couple of years knows that there's something kind of funny and unexplainable about it. And I always try to follow this dictum by Konstantin Paustovsky that if we had a chance, doubtful happiness to be born here, we should at least try and find out what it's all about. So that's why I had this passion for the world's oddities. And by now I have a sizable collection of them. And I'm proud to say that not all of these places, but half of them at least, I have visited. And that's why probably I was approached by publishers, John Gray International Publishers, not so long ago, and they asked me to put together an atlas of the world's most bizarre places, which is still being in production now. And it's been done before, but most of the compilers they find information somewhere else. Whereas I tried to deal with the places which I actually knew at first-hand knowledge of, which was not always easy. And as I said to you last time, you don't really need to go far, you know, to find such places. I mean, of course, you have to be aware of the existence of try points, for example. Uh, there are not so many of them. I think there are only kind of a dozen of them in the world. That's the place where three countries meet up, you know, three different countries. The only one inside the city isn't Basel, you know, and I once myself, you know, because the airport has the exit to Germany, France, and Switzerland simultaneously. And instead of Swiss exit, I exited through German one. And when I tried to get some Swiss francs, you know, I ended up with euros, you know, not so long ago. I don't know how come. Anyway, so you have to be aware of that. There is a village called Schengen, you know, that gave its name to the famous Schengen zone, you know, and I was there and it was quite fun, you know, because with my uh, friends who accompanied me then, they said, oh, well, we normally, they lived in Luxembourg themselves. So there's Luxembourg, Germany, and France in one village. We normally go for lunch to Germany, have a nice kind of steak, you know, or Schweinekotlet, and then for coffee to France, you know, because it's kind of several hundred meters away, because in France they make much better coffee than in Germany. And we tried, it was quite exciting, you know, very interesting, and especially for someone, you know, like me, who was then rather fresh from the world's, uh, the world's biggest cage and so on. So there are places like that. There are places where four different administrative units meet, you know. There are a couple of places in Africa where four different countries meet. I think they're all in the lakes and seas. But there is a place in the States called Four Corners, where 4 different states of the United States come together, and so on. So if you go down to small administrative units, then of course there are more and more of those. You may have heard of the places called condominiums, and nothing to do with real estate here. It is in kind of geographical terms, it means the places of joint ownership. Yes, indeed, condominiums are yeah, the places of joint ownership. And these are like islands. There is a Pheasant Island, for example, which is jointly owned by France and Spain. It is in a river, it is unpopulated. So France controls it for one half of the year and Spain for another half of the year. So somehow they manage. Uh, uh, they're not very common. So there are some more. There is also a European border, and that's where I was kind of very close to a European border that is 3,000 miles away from Europe, it's the Caribbean. There is an island called Saint Martin, which is half Dutch and half French, and it's really very distinctively Dutch, one half, and very distinctively French, the other half. And it has a European border in the middle of the Caribbean. So that I didn't quite reach it, but when we were actually in St. Kitts and on the beach, which is nearby, we could see planes actually landing on the island of Saint Martin, which recently had I think it was quite a nasty earthquake, unfortunately. But again, you don't have to go very far, because I find one of the most bizarre places in the world is the island of Sak, which is on our doorstep. I think I mentioned it briefly at our last session as the last feudal state, which until recently was actually ruled by a feudal lord, called the seigneur. Now there is still a seigneur, but his or now her powers are not as strong as they used to be. But Sark was the place. It's a great question. Would be, next time when I work for QI, if I ever do, I'll definitely use it. So what's the last invasion, the date of the last invasion of Great Britain by France? Huh? Well, you'll probably say, oh gosh, in kind of Norman times, we are looking kind of hundreds of years ago. No, it's 1989, actually. In 1989, a drunken Frenchman called André Gare landed in Sark, which is not part of the UK, but is part of Great Britain, with a rifle, yes, and a hand grenade. So basically, he was very drunk. So he kind of stumbled towards the village center. There's one village there, and put a notice on the notice board that he's taking control of Sark, And then he went to the island's only pub, to drink some more, and he was apprehended by the local constable, and constables in Sark, they're elected from civilian people, they rotate. So the constable was called. So he apprehended André Gare and frog marched him to the island's local prison. And I saw that prison. It's a kind of, doesn't look very nice, but the maximum prison term on Sark by its constitution, and there's its constitution. I have a book of it at home, believe it or not. It's 2 days. So for 2 days, probably you can survive it. Moreover, that another article in the Constitution of Sark says that while there is a prisoner in prison, the constable and his wife are responsible for feeding him. So, and the constable's wife was a good cook. So the Frenchman kind of got sober, had the time of his life, probably had wine as well, I don't know. And he was actually thrown out of the prison after 1 day because he was so well, he was a glutton. He ate too much, and the poor constable's wife was not coping, so they had to deport him back to France. After 24 hours. But by all kind of all the parameters, it was an invasion, a French invasion of Great Britain, not of the United Kingdom, but of Great Britain. Here we go. And, I kind of dug up this fact, and I was very pleased to have done so. And another place not far from home is Berwick-upon-Tweed. It's one of my favorite towns in the whole world because it's full of dichotomy. It's so dualistic, half English, half Scottish. Changed hands about 13 times throughout history, not always peacefully. And even now, it has, for example, the only football team because territorially it's now in England, but its football team plays in the Scottish Football League, and lots of this kind of things. when I remember, I came to work for the travel section of the Daily Telegraph some time ago, and there was, and I was doing my Baedeker rates, and I always wanted to go to Berwick upon Tweed, and they said, yeah, like to go. Then they said, then, do you know that the town is still officially at war with Russia? I said, oh, come on. And several people said, yeah, you don't really know how it happens, but everyone was talking about it. It's a kind of a joke. So when I was there, I spoke with the mayor, I spoke with some local historians, and discovered it wasn't actually a joke. It wasn't, because Berwick, as one of the three royal boroughs, still remains one. You know, its representatives have to walk next to the Queen, I think, very close in all the processions. So it was to be included in all the peace treaties and proclamation of hostilities, you know, until very recently. And it was done so when the Crimean War started in, I think, 1859, if I'm not mistaken. So it was included as a warring party, you know, on the British side, but still a separate warring party. But when the truce was signed, it was left out, just forgotten, you know, of the truce agreement. So theoretically, it continued to be at war with the Tsarist Russia, yes, absolutely, until 1971, when allegedly, I mean, someone told me, a tipsy Soviet diplomat came to Berwick, and having had much more to drink, you know, signed the peace treaty finally with Berwick upon Tweed. So for Russians to be able to sleep quietly now, not to be attacked. So, but that's kind of a thing bordering on joke, but it is not a joke, and it actually helps you understand the history of the place uh, quite well. Uh, I've just mentioned just a couple of other places which, you know, anyone could discover, and in those places, I probably, luckily for myself, haven't been. One of them is called Ernst Thälmann Island, which is an island off Cuba. It was when Fidel Castro visited East Germany in 1972. It presented it as a gift to Walter Ulbricht. You know, said this is a gift from Cuban people. That it's unpopulated. So somehow, you know, everyone forgot about it, and when East Germany ceased to exist, the only thing that was there was a big bust of Ernst Thälmann, which is still there allegedly. So it ceased to exist, and now some people have went and said, "Wait a moment. So whose is this island now?" Uh, that's a good question. No one knows. Some people think it might belong to the mini nation, micronation of Molossia, whom I mentioned at our last session, which is my favorite micronation because it's so funny and ironic and witty, you know. And this ruler, uh, uh, Kevin Bow, you know, uh, he proclaimed at some point a war on East Germany, you know, uh, just to make a point, you know, that Molossia was a separate country. So, and when East Germany ceased to exist, basically, he obviously stopped being at war with East Germany, but he still theoretically remains at war with this little island, you know, on Stedman Island. So, who is going to resolve it? God knows. You know, certain issues which, you know, in many cases, like with the enclaves, as I said last time, the governments prefer just to give up on them rather than uh, do something about it, like Seborga, for example. I told you, I mean, yes, okay. So the prince proclaimed independence of that little village on the border of France and Italy, from Italy, not willing to pay taxes. And he kept talking to me about it at length as we were drinking, alternatively in one of the two restaurants of that village, you know, because they would throw him out of one because he refused to pay. He said, "Yeah, I'm royalty, I'm the prince. You don't, royalties don't pay, you know. Royalty doesn't pay, don't pay for their drinks." So he would walk across the road, and they would accept him because he brought tourists with him. Normally, he was very colorful, and I think I told him he made me the ambassador of Seborg in Britain. You know, and I did my duty very well because I did put it on the map after the article in the Spectator that I wrote. And now they're still thriving. As I said, there is a prince now in the third. I think there was a princess at some point, someone not from the family, but a common, you know, from the outside. The family, the royal family were flower farmers, but this one's from outside the family. So what would the Italian government was supposed to do? I actually called Rome when I first discovered Seborg, and I said, "Are you aware of this place?" I said, "Oh, that madman," they said. "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So I said, "So what are you going to do?" And they said nothing because from our point of view, you know, he doesn't exist. You know, it's a very interesting attitude. Well, what could they do? In the Soviet Union, they would know what to do, or in Cuba or in China, they would send, you know, Even one tank would be too much. They would probably send a couple of policemen or gendarmes or whatever, and kind of to defeat the army of five, or and to frog march the prince somewhere, to the nearest prison or whatever, or nearest labor camp. But it's kind of free world, and it's not it's not the Navalny situation. So they just gave up on it and decided not to interfere, which is wonderful. I kind of love this sort of scenario. And just another example, not so funny this time, of the oddity, but this is actually quite a sad oddity again, close to home. It's the island of Alderney, one of the Channel Islands, which, like all of them, constitutes a separate state with its own money, its own parliament, and so on. But in Alderney, which is the smallest one, they call it the States of Alderney for some reason, in plural. So Alderney, and that's not a lot of people know, it was one of the very few places during the Second World War outside Germany, Poland, and Czech Republic, I think, because the Nazis only built, they built concentration camps everywhere, but extermination camps where they actually killed people, and en masse, they built only in the countries where they kind of felt a bit more comfortable with doing this for all sorts of reasons, which is Poland, not in Germany even. I think in Germany itself they didn't do it. Poland, Czech Republic, Lithuania. I think I might be missing one or two, but there was a camp in Alderney, which is very hush kind of. People don't like to talk about it. There is a group there who actually tries to promote this memory. They had a, because, Channel Islands were occupied by the Nazis, and it was the model occupation, very quiet, but not in Alderney, because in Alderney there was a camp where they kept several thousand prisoners of war, with local people serving as guards and so on. Mostly Russian prisoners of war were there, and they were exterminating them by throwing, a certain number of them off into the sea of the rocks, regularly. So by all description, it was extermination camp. And as I said, unfortunately, it was done with the help of the locals. And this is a very sad page, of course, in the history of Channel Islands, which is not, as we all agreed, it's not part of United Kingdom. It's a separate kind of entity, but still, it's very sad that it happened. And actually, when I visited it and I wrote about it for The Guardian, the Channel Islands visited repeatedly, I found quite a lot of so-called occupation societies, they're called, where people study history of occupation, but in many ways they promote the history of the Third Reich. You can buy speeches of Hitler there, and here listen to them, bookmarks with swastika and so on, anything that would be very strictly banned in Germany and involve a prison sentence. If you did it there, you can do it. And I was astounded by it, struck by it. I wrote about it for The Guardian, and you can still see this article on the internet. And which reminds me, I kind of bring in this part, I'll make a short break in a minute, that Ukraine now, my native Ukraine, they probably don't know that either. It became the first post-communist country which officially, by law, made Soviet propaganda, Soviet symbols, equalized them with Nazi propaganda and Nazi symbols. So now, for displaying a red star or a kind of seemingly innocent kind of red flag or whatever, it's a crime. It's not an offense; it's a crime, and it's very, very, very strictly prohibited. Whereas, the other parts of the former Soviet Empire, some like Russia, Moldova, some other Central Asian, but they still have monuments to Lenin and so on, which in Ukraine now would be against the law. So maybe they should do it in Alderney as well. So that's kind of discoveries, nice, interesting, funny, and not very funny. That well, you can still make. Anyone can make if you keep being guided by this beauty and strangeness, so aptly expressed by Robert Byron. So we'll make a break for 5 minutes, and I think Christine had something to say. Yeah, and then we'll continue. Hello?
Hello, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, well, I can.
Okay, everybody. So We've had a couple of comments and everything. Oops, hang on a sec. Let's start my video. Start my video. Oh, there I am. Whoops. Right, I'm there. Okay, so I'm now going to announce a competition that we have this week, which is please could you describe the most bizarre experience from your travels in one sentence? Describe the most bizarre experience from your travels in one sentence.
And if possible, I can add a little thing to it. This sentence should start once when in, you know, this 3 words, once when in whatever, Switzerland. So that should be the start of this sentence, okay?
Okay, and the winner will receive a copy of Vitali's bumper book of travels. So, and if you look in the comments, Dimitri is giving instructions on how you can actually enter this competition as well. So, so that is great. So, I think Vitali has disappeared for a sec, and oh, here he is.
Yeah,
Vitali.
I just wanted to add, yeah, so you can either submit your entries by email to vitali@vitaliev.info, or we can stick to the interactive format we've been trying out in the past, and you can all put in your entry on this common Google Doc. Please name your entry, because we have sometimes trouble finding people who Vitali then selects as the winner. You will see on the page, if you click on it, you can just pick one of the existing entries and put in your sentence that is supposed to start with what, once again, Vitali?
Once when in.
Once when in. Okay.
Yeah, because it's specified traveling, not you know, once when at home, but once when somewhere, you know. In can be country, town, city, whatever.
Okay, so Vitali, there's a couple of are we going to deal with the questions right at the end?
Whatever, I don't mind.
I mean, Mark, the socialist, had a couple of points he just was he raised. Well, he just wanted to know your thoughts on nuclear disarmament, and also he was excited about your comments on Berwick upon Tweed. I don't know if Mark's there to ask you himself. Mark the socialist.
sounds scary.
No, I know.
Well, maybe these are serious questions.
Hello.
Can we? Hello.
Oh, Mark's there.
I'm
okay,
here.
you can ask
Hiya.
Vitali yourself. Yeah.
Hiya,
Hello,
you're
Mark.
right.
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you very much for your questions.
Says I can't start my video, sorry, but I will chat to you.
Yeah, sure. If you're asking about nuclear disarmament, can we just come to that in the end? Yeah, because it's quite a serious question, you know, and I just want to keep talking about travels, you know.
Of course.
Yeah. So
because when you mentioned Ukraine, I thought, oh, and you were talking about Chernobyl and things. I thought it was quite relevant to talk about nuclear disarmament. But yeah, of course, come to the end.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks for that. Do you have any questions, kind of more travel related?
Have you been to Berwick on Tweed?
Many times, as I said, it's one of my favorite places. Are you from there?
Isn't it? It's a lovely place.
It is lovely. You can feel this kind of, they call it almost like Ely place. You can feel something in the air, you know. It's neither here nor there, you know. I have a feeling for such places. Yeah. Absolutely.
They have this kind of mad march once a year where it's like, is it like the people who feel English march down the road and then the people who feel Scottish march down the road in the other way and they meet in the middle? Yeah,
and well, there is a poem that quite a lot of people kind of recited to me that I won't remember it in something indeed, but we are not neither Scotland nor England, but we are Berwick upon Tweed, and they call themselves Berwickers, you know, when they ask what's your nationality, you know.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting lot, yeah. By the way, in the outskirts of Berwick, that's interesting. I discovered the last remaining visible signs of English-Scottish border.
Yeah.
Normally it doesn't exist, but one farm was built straight on the border years ago, and the wall of that farm, I did a piece about it for the Herald
Oh, really?
newspaper where I worked here. So the wall of that farm actually, is the border between England and Scotland, is the visible marked border. Most people would say it doesn't exist anymore, but it does.
It's fascinating, though, isn't it? So if Scotland was to get independence, do you think Berwick should be English or Scottish?
I don't know. I think they're quite happy with being neither,
They just want to be a unilateral town on their own, like independence from both.
Yeah, I have to say, I once interviewed one of the mayors there, and I think the mayors also, for some reason they change every year, I think, as well. They have quite strange kind of their own little rules. And she was a very good looking young lady, very good. Really, I still remember, just stunning. And I asked you what you thought about the Scottish independence and so on. And she said, "Oh, it would be great for us. We'll be on the border. We'll collect taxes, from both sides, and we'll thrive." I quite like this practicality, almost like the practicality of the enclave dwellers, So
let's move our conversation on. I think we still have
you.
quite a lot of program to get through.
Thank you for chatting. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.
No, we'll come back later. Right. So I just want to tell you again briefly about probably my most interesting, from my point of view, discoveries that I made, in my more than 30 years of travels, and they're all, of course, described in that book in detail. But I'll just go through them very briefly. And I'm very often asked, what's the best place you ever visited, and I always find it hard to answer, but I would normally say there are two places that I really like a lot. One is the Falkland Islands, and the other one is Alaska. So the Falkland was, for me, it was like a discovery. I was sent there by the telegraph in the wake of Prince Charles's visit there. They there's a tradition that, they write about the place before the royal visit. So I'm grateful to Prince Charles for that opportunity. And I spent about 10 days there and completely fell in love with the place. It's amazing, despite a rather horrible British military transport plane fly there, which was and still is the only way of getting there. Where we had to kind of eat on command and drink on command and use the toilet on command, and the food was very kind of standard army kind of type. And I remember even they had a kind of a bag for a paper bag, a sick bag, and it had this army code, and number on it. So NATO so and so and so 24/25,000, sickness bag. And so that was funny. And on my ticket it said civilian, I remember, which sounded a bit like an insult. But the place was amazing. At that time, they still had 36,000 mines, all over Argentinian mines. Now they removed them, actually, I was pleased to know, but almost all of them. But then they had this very clearly marked minefields, and you could see people playing golf, next to minefields. Obviously, they couldn't pick up the ball if it ended up there. But the sheep were okay, Allegedly, these landmines were not sensitive enough. Or rather, the sheep were not heavy enough to activate them, but the human was, And the people were just absolutely exceptional. The nature, amazing. The birds on some islands, the island populated by 2 people, for example, or 3 people, and thousands of penguins, like Sea Lion Island, So the penguins wouldn't pay any attention. You can walk through them if you could take the smell, they're extremely smelly creatures. So a lot of sea lions, as well, and the birds would sit on your shoe, on your head sometimes, because they were not afraid of humans. The fish would jump on the hook without any bait, which was almost quite boring. I think actually German fishermen started going, then soon it will probably stop. So because already when I was there were some kind of Germans who came to fish, and there were no kind of restricting rules. It was so rich in fish. And the people are very kind of British in a way, or rather patriotic, but also I never heard a single kind of bad comment about Argentinians. They were rather kind of talking about them with pity. They said, all these young guys, you know, they're all hungry, you know, and thin. So we brought them food, and in exchange for that, they would fix our kind of roof or cellar or so on. So it sounded like a rather peaceful occupation, which it actually wasn't. But I think there were only 3 casualties on the local side. I mean, not a single fatality, I think, but 3 wounded people. Anyway, it's a just fascinating place. I absolutely loved it. Moreover, that, you know, it's not often you have a chance to get there. As for Alaska, yeah, I called it in my I think first webinar a shopping mall of beauty, you know, because it's very American and it's still very un-American. I mean, because nowhere else in America or in the world probably they have huge parking lots for airplanes. So in Alaska, to have a small airplane is okay. Many people do it. There are kind of traffic accidents, plane accidents, rules, and so on. Plus, the most bizarre thing about Alaska is probably, believe it or not, is the ads in its newspapers, the well, dating ads, because Alaska has, it so happened, many more men than women, you know, probably because the conditions were harsh, and so it ended up with the 1/3, I think, male population kind of exceeding female population. And I've never seen such, you know, well, cries of the soul, you know, something really, any woman, please reply, you know, I don't care what you look like, I don't care, you know, what your age is, just please respond, you know, the kind of this desperation. It's pretty ordinary occasions, well, to have a bear or an elk, you know, wander at a town or a village, and the cyclist will be maybe sometimes the bear would flee from the cyclist, sometimes the cyclist would flee from the bear, you know, but you have to be careful. Even in Anchorage, in the capital, it happened, you know. But my main discovery there was, of course, this amazing community of Russian old believers. And I was, again, one of the first, if not the first journalists whom they accepted, probably because of my Russian sounding name, because they're very reclusive. They're not on any maps. There are no signs to their villages. There are several thousand of them living in Kodiak Peninsula. And they ended up there. They came from Oregon, and to Oregon they came from, I think, from Serbia. You know, so they've been actually wandering the world since the days of Peter the Great. There was a very cruel Tsar, and during his rule, there happened a schism where Russian Orthodoxy split into 2 branches. You know, the new believers, obviously, and the old believers who stuck to the old ways of crossing themselves. There are no real differences, just, you know, some very, very kind of token differences, but still, you know, Peter was very cruel, and all these people, actually, all the old believers were stuck to the old rules. They were exiled or executed. So since then, they're wandering the world. And these people, obviously, they had no roots in Russia, but they still, I spent 3 days with them, stayed with them, went kind of hunting with them, fishing with them, smoked the fish, and so on. They speak this language of the 18th century Russian language, which is unbelievable. You know, I couldn't believe it. And I had to wear the traditional attire. You can see here some women wearing, it's called talichka, this kerchief. You know, they look a bit like Mennonites and so on, but it's not so. So very jolly community, and men are not allowed to cut facial hair, so they all have beards. And we drank very nice vodka with them, although they're not allowed to drink vodka. But I was then smoking. When they saw me smoking, they were really outraged, and they said, "You should hide from our little father, from the priest. If he sees you, you'll be in trouble." I said, "Oh no," I kind of, you know, I said, "No, don't do it," you know. So very, very strict, but they still ask permission from the little father to get married and so on. But, you know, they have some modern technology. They have televisions, although it's not allowed either. But the priest told me, the little father, well, you don't not allow it, but they go to their neighbors, the American neighbors, and watch it anyway. So I decided we'll allow. So they watch television. They have some motor, of course, cars, motor vehicles, as they have on Mount Tessus now. When I was on Mount Tessus for the first time, there's only one Unimog truck there, you know, and one driver. Now they have cars, more cars. And this community of old believers also, they have, well, they have navigation equipment in their fishing vessels, because fishing is their main occupation. So what was amazing there is that these people, they didn't go through all these horrible revolutions, wars, and so on, and they were still very Russian. They carried this Russianness, this kind of openness of the soul. We had this vodka that started singing, and it was just like it was like a Jurassic Park situation, to me, at least it was. So I could learn so much from them, and they kind of accepted me, and that was very, 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 very pleasing. They have an excellent school, one of the best in Alaska, and their kids, of course, many of them don't even speak good Russian or any Russian at all, but they study Russian at school, and in all the um, results, the school is at the top of the league, in the whole of Alaska. So this is quite something. They're very, very diligent people, very kind of, there's nothing in them from Homo Sovieticus, that's, Zinoviev expression, because that's what was created in the USSR by trampling on people's dignity and making them live in fear for all those years. So these people were free from that, and they're proper Russians, basically. They're pure Russians. They're creative. They're passionate. They're kind. So it was an absolutely amazing experience, and I'm very proud of that discovery. It was on the front page of the Telegraph. It is in the book as well, and I think I was always, again, I think it's time maybe to say about the worst experience. And another one I must mention very quickly. That's more recent one. With Christine, we went to St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean not so long ago. I didn't really know that part of the world very well, and we went for Geographical magazine, which Paul Presley used to be the editor, by the way. It was all kind of, I didn't really know what to write about. Well, I thought I'll find something there, and I did find something rather amazing. I discovered that Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers of the USA, we knew he was, everyone knows, even from the musical, that he was born in the Caribbean and in Nevis, although he was kind of, his mother was an Anglican, and he had no father. He was born out of wedlock, which at that time was kind of stigma, really, a very big stigma. So this little boy, growing on this remote Caribbean island and not accepted to the school, but there was a community there, community of Jews who fled from Portugal and Spain after the Inquisition. Little known community. So they lived in Nevis and they had their own school, and they invited him to study there when he was 5 years old. As a result of this, by the age of 9, Hamilton, the founder of the National Reserve and so on, practically forgot his English, but was fluent in Hebrew and could recite, passages of Torah standing on the table. He was so tiny, as his teacher would recount. They basically, they were very technically astute. They invented new ways of crystallizing sugar, which they're still using. They're still using in the Caribbean until the sugar industry came to a stop there. So they were very kind of inventive people, and had the community. And then, obviously Hamilton grew up and left the island and became what he became. And he was actually, he was not Jewish, of course, but people who knew about his Jewish upbringing, they were quite merciless. And he was called a dirty Jew or something, by, I forgot the name of, he was the vice president, I think, or whatever, who actually killed him on a duel. So his alleged Jewishness was kind of the reason for all of that. Unfortunately, there is nothing about it in the musical, or actually very, very little is written about it. It's very, very little known fact, which was uncovered not so long ago in the 1970s by a visiting rabbi of a United States cruise liner, the first one that came to Nevis, actually, in history. So, and then a couple of little publications, nothing. So I kind of was very proud to have discovered it. I got an award from the Caribbean tourism, for that feature. So again, I didn't expect to make this discovery, but it completely changed my view on the whole world. And that Jewish community, by the way, no one knows what happened to it, because about 200 years ago, they suddenly took off and disappeared. And no one knows what happened. What remains is kind of this Michwa, you know, the old ruins of the old kind of life, and the old Jewish cemetery, which was reconsecrated in about 30 years ago. So they still kind of discovered it. There is this old Jewish cemetery where you can see this is the grave of I think a 2-year-old boy called Yehuda from Portugal and so on. So quite of them died young, you know, but it's still they now look after it, and the locals call this little lane the Jew Walk, you know, and that's how I discovered it. We had a guide and he said, "Oh, there's a Jew Walk." I said, "It's really called that?" He said, "No, it's not written. We call it the Jew Walk." And then he said, "You know what? We love Jewish people here." And I said, "Well, how come? It's unusual." And he kind of told me about the story, and we went to a local museum, library, archives, and kind of uncovered it all. That it was entirely true. I'll take another maybe 4 or 5 minutes, if I may. So I really was very happy with finding the story, because it's all about good deeds, you know, that never disappear. You do something good, and as my late friend Peter Houston used to say, you do good things, and then good things come to you, you know, and that's absolutely so. That community proves it very well. I still dream of, I don't know, it probably never happened, of visiting, for some reason, Tristan da Cunha, you know. I just love the idea of it, the most remote island in the world, you know, with thousands of miles to the nearest settlement, English-speaking place, 300 people with the capital. That's one only settlement called, who knows what the capital of Tristan da Cunha is called, huh? Huh? Does anyone know? It's called Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, huh? What a name. It's like music to me, and I can just repeat it and meditate, you know, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas. So it's very unlikely that I'll ever end up there, although, you know, my good friend, travel writer L.D. Burkett, she managed to spend some time on Pitcairn, which is another very remote community consisting of the descendants of the uprising on the Bounty, you know, and still also with English names. They're all kind of, I think, a couple of names only for the whole village. I mean, last names, and but still, you know, speaking English and having kind of been in English dependency. 33 people, I think, now only left, but in Tristan da Cunha is over 300 people. So still, but I don't think it's likely. But I nearly made it to the island of St. Helena, I said. And for some reason, I always wanted to visit it. That's when Napoleon died, of course. And I came close while flying to Falklands, because the refueling stop of this military transport plane was on Ascension Island, you know. I'll never forget this terminal drinks kiosk, which was said, you know, there's a military base there, and of course the sea turtles, whom we didn't see. But so Ascension Island is in the same kind of parish almost. There's a huge parish there, sometimes in the middle of the Atlantic, which spans over thousands of square miles, which kind of encompasses Ascension Island and St. Helena. I'm not sure about Tristan da Cunha and Pitcairn, but coming very close. Huge expanse. I was fascinated by that place. Moreover, that in St. Helena, they only recently opened the airport, and I was about to go there, but it didn't happen. And they had allegedly the most cultured children in the world, you know, because children had no television. The island had no television until about 20 years ago. So and children there allegedly were very, very nice and cultured. So they had lots of sociologists, you know, coming there when television appeared in St. Helena. Anyway, I just love this whole history and this whole kind of national structure of it, you know, consisting of kind of local dwellers of the islanders, you know, and people from different countries, from South Africa, from India, whatever. And I already had the ticket booked and the cabin booked on the Royal Mail ship St. Helena. It was until recently the only way to get there from Cape Town, 2 weeks one way, you know, and then 2 weeks back, and then it would stay there for a week. So that was the only way of visiting it, and it would carry. It was the only connection to the rest of the world. So I had the cabin. I knew whom I was going to share it with. So it was all arranged for the Telegraph. But at that point, I had a call from the Telegraph's editor-in-chief, one and only, Charles Moore, you know, then, and he said, "Listen, Vitali, we are very sorry. You know, we are going to fly to St. Helena tomorrow, but we want to send you somewhere else, actually." And they sent me instead on the world's most expensive package tour. They suddenly got an invite, you know, called around the world on a private jet. Why did they send me and wanted to disrupt my travel to St. Helena? Because they said, you know, we'll be very embarrassed by the hospitality, of course, and would feel like writing something good about them, whereas you wouldn't care. I never write it. So I would always try to write the truth, or whatever I thought was the truth. So I said, you're the only person who could do it. So please, it's a very important assignment, blah, blah, blah. So I had to cancel St. Helena and go on the trip, which was funny, you know, but it was the worst experience in my life because, well, you're not allowed even to walk, you know, on our own for more than 30 meters. All the kind of air-conditioned buses whooshed us through India, through Thailand, I think, you know, I couldn't even register the countries. And, you know, we had to ride elephants every day. Well, I couldn't stand the elephants already. I've seen so many of them. And fireworks at dinner and so on. And by the way, of course, all the meals, 6-star hotels, it was all included, you know, and you were not allowed to walk inside these hotel resorts in Thailand, or buggies picking you up and being very angry if you try to walk on your own 2 feet, you know, I mean, 2 legs, sorry. And it was just awful, you know, and so fireworks, they wouldn't sit down to dinner without fireworks. I mean, for me, it was okay. I wasn't paying for it, but for the other participants, there were about 40 of us, you know, each of whom paid $75,000, you know, and drinks were not included. 28 days, $75,000, drinks not included. Can you believe it? On the ground, but on the plane was waiting while they were kind of being whooshed around India, you know, with air-conditioned buses and so on. The plane, which was supposed to be Concorde, but Concorde crashed shortly before them, so they replaced it with Boeing. The plane stuffed with all kinds of perfumery, bars, you know, vintage wines, and so on. I had 6 seats on it, you know, 2 seats for smoking, 4 seats in front of the plane, you know, for just God knows what, you know, for eating. My name was embroidered everywhere as if, you know, they were worried that I would forget it, you know, kept reminding me of my name. And the staff was all Canadian, by the way, all the stewards and the sommeliers and whatever. So on the plane, you could drink as much as you like. And the Americans, they were all Americans apart from 2 Spaniards, actually, and myself, you know, them, and they would jog around the plane as well, you know, the women, you know, because there were hardly any people, and it was huge. So they obviously drank like there's no tomorrow, because on the ground they had to pay for drinks. And even being all multimillionaires, probably they didn't like the idea. And they didn't like India. They didn't like, you know, they said whatever they saw through the windows of the bus, they didn't like poverty, you know. And so basically, one of them said to me in the end, God, I did it again, and I don't really remember anything, you know, apart from some of the meals that I had. No wonder. So basically, I concluded it was the worst travel experience in my life because it was so hedonistic, and hedonism makes your eyes oily and unable to see things for what they are, you know. But it was useful in that respect, because to have that experience only for 8 days, I had to return after 8 days because I got very badly, believe it or not, in India, despite all the 6-star hotels and the fact that we were all given mineral water, even to brush our teeth. But a drop from the shower, whatever, half of the group were laid up with horrible cases of Delhi belly. So it's actually quite ironic that it happened on this most expensive tour in the world. So, and I wrote a scathing and I think another funny piece about it for the Telegraph. But the most amazing thing was that Abercrombie and Kent travel agents were arranging. They loved it. You know, they said, "Oh, Vitali, great stuff. You know, great publicity for us." But I wrote that it was the worst experience in my life, and that anyone who likes traveling should never attempt it. So lots of mysteries and enigmas in this life, as I said. Well, we should keep trying, because, you know, you never know when we start a journey. And that's again, that's one of the attractions of the journey, probably the main one, where we are going to end. That brings me back to my kind of favorite quote from Lin Yutang about good traveler and perfect traveler. And the good traveler doesn't know where he is going to, but the perfect traveler is not sure where he's coming from. I mean, I hope I become a good traveler, because I try not to know where I'm going to, and I succeed sometimes. I don't think I will ever become a perfect traveler, because my background and my past are quite, substantial, and I don't see myself ever getting rid of them. But, some of you may be luckier and may become perfect travelers. Good luck with that.